Emily stared at the empty formula can on the messy coffee table while seated at the edge of her tired sofa. The little apartment was filled with the buzz of the ancient refrigerator, a faint echo of how tightly she was keeping her life together. Lily, her daughter, slept in the next room, her small face calm and uninformed of the everyday hardships her mother endured. Emily opened her phone with shaking fingers and texted Claire, her closest friend, a frantic text. "Hey, will you kindly lend me some money to get Lily some formula? Only until payday. I apologize once again." Her heart seized as she sent. She had needed aid before, and the weight of her circumstances felt like a thundercloud. But when she looked at her phone, her stomach turned in terror. Claire had not received the message. Nick had. Her ex-husband, Nick, now a rich tech CEO. The Nick graced Forbes covers and attended galas while she scrawled by in a rundown apartment. The same Nick who had wandered out of her life when their marriage fell apart, left behind unfulfilled promises and the idea of a family she had once loved. Her fingers hovered over her phone, poised to undo the message, but before she could act, her screen flashed with his response. "Wait." Emily's heart sped as I arrived right now. She wrote furiously, "No, no, no, this cannot be happening. Apologize. Incorrect person. Ignore this." Her pulse thumping in her ears. She hit send and fixed her gaze on the screen, but the phone vibrated once more instead of soothing her. Her alert on a banking app. Curious and a bit afraid, she opened it and her breath was trapped in her throat. A reserve, $1,000,000. Her first reaction was incredulity, her second, that this had to be a mistake, was verified by the sender's information. Nick's corporate account handled the transfer. Her hand shot straight to her mouth. $1,000? Regarding formula? She felt lightheaded. The walls of her small apartment seemed to slink and bend around her. Her door knocked sharply, sending her reeling back into reality. Her head flew. He was unable to arrive here that quickly. Is he able? Shaking, her heart in her throat, she went to the door. More knock, louder this time. She inhaled deeply and opened it to discover herself squarely facing the man she hadn't seen in almost 4 years. Nick stood there, his keen blue eyes softened as they met hers. His fitted suit perfect, his expression invisible, but his presence filled the entryway. Authoritative and shockingly serene. "Emily," he said, his low rumble making her knees weak. "We need to talk." Her voice froze in her throat. She could only stare at him, at the man who had been her husband now standing in her doorway wielding all the force in the universe. "Nick, she started, but the words wouldn't come. Her emotions were a jumbled tempest. Panic, guilt, wrath, and a flutter of something she couldn't quite define. Emily wanted nothing more than to vanish. The little apartment looked much smaller now, and he entered without waiting for her request. "What are you doing here?" she managed to choke out, just above a whisper. "You needed help," he said just now. "And I'm here." "Nick, there was a mistake here," she stammered. "Not meant to forward you that message. I didn't ask you for." She gestured wildly, unable to say the words. $1,000,000? His lips curved into a faint smile as he finished for her. "I know, but I sent it anyway." "Why?" she asked, her voice sharper now. "You don't owe me anything." He looked at her, then she thought she saw something flutter in his countenance. Regret, maybe, or guilt, but it was gone just as fast. "Because I can," he answered, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Her hands came together in fists. "Nick, I'm not needing your charity." "Emily," he interrupted, his tone strong but not nasty. "You have a daughter to take care of." "Our daughter." His words struck her like a thunderclap. "Our daughter." She hadn't expected him to say that. He had always been far off, cold, and yet here he was, demanding a share in a life he had turned away. "Lily is my responsibility," she replied, her voice faltering. "Not yours." Nick's face darkened. "She's mine, too, and I'm not walking away this time." Emily's breath seized. This time, what did he mean by that? Before she could reply, another alert blazed on her phone. She looked down and her blood ran cold. It was not just $1,000,000, it was a list of 5 million consecutive transfers. One after the other, rapidly successive, her voice just a whisper. She raised her head to him and asked, "What are you doing, Nick?" "I'm fixing things," he replied, his tone firm. "Starting now." But as he said those words, Emily couldn't get rid of the sense that his unexpected generosity wasn't just about Lily. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. He was not telling her anything else that was motivating him. Emily sat paralyzed, her fingers hovering over her phone. The succession of bank alerts teasing her with numbers too great for her understanding. $5 million. Every transfer carried Nick's name as the sender, and they all felt like weights dragging her farther into unfamiliar seas. Leaning over the edge of her little kitchen counter, Nick watched her response. He appeared to be very calm, as though this were normal. Her impulse to shrink away was piqued by his blue eyes, always sharp and calculated, now piercing her with an intensity. "Emily," he said, his voice shattering the quiet. "You don't have to look at me like I've just handed you a bomb." She whipped her head up, her face a mix of incredulity and wrath. "That's exactly what, Nick. This is a bomb. I can't accept this. Do you have any clue what this looks like?" "You already have," he answered, his tone cold but forceful. "The money is in your account." Emily jumped to her feet, pacing the little living room. "It's done," she said. "This is not regarding the money. You cannot show up after all these years, toss millions upon me, and expect things to miraculously, what? Correct yourself?" He straightened, his manner changing as he neared the distance between them. "I don't expect anything, Emily, but I'm not going to stand by and watch you struggle. Especially not when it affects Lily." Emily stopped walking, her chest clenching at the reference of her daughter. "Don't bring her into this. You cannot waltz back into our life and act as though you are sympathetic." For the first time, Nick's strong facade cracked, his jaw tightened, and he breathed softly, as if struggling with something weighty. "You left Nick and you left us." "I left because I thought it was the only way to give you a chance to be happy," he added, his voice softer now. "I didn't leave because I didn't care." Emily glanced at him, startled. "Happy? You think quitting your family was the answer? You don't get to rewrite history." Nick, his eyes sank to the floor for a minute, then met hers once more. "You're correct," he conceded. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that no amount of money could heal the agony he had caused. But before she could speak, a gentle cry sounded from the next room. "Lily." Emily's instincts kicked in. She vanished into the bedroom, brushing by Nick without saying another word. Her daughter's small shape whirled under the sheets, her cheeks flushed from slumber. Emily crouched by the bed, combing Lily's hair while the small child looked up at her with fuzzy eyes. "Mommy?" Lily said, her voice slurred. "It's okay, sweetheart," Emily said. "Go back to sleep." Emily had a tsunami of guilt as Lily's eyes closed. She did need help, but taking it from Nick seemed like unlocking a door she had battled so hard to keep closed. When she returned to the living room, Nick was still there, his hands in his pockets, observing her with an unreadable face. For all her wrath and pride, Emily finally broke the stillness. "What do you want, Nick?" "Really?" they said at once, the weight of unspoken words hovering heavy in the air. He paused, his jaw once more clenching. "I want to be part of Lily's life," he murmured, his voice firm but tinged with passion. "And yours, if you'll let me." Her heart twisted at his words, though now it felt like a perilous idea. It was the kind of thing she had previously dreamed of from him. "You can't just throw money at us and expect forgiveness," she murmured gently. "You don't get to decide that." Nick's voice grew somewhat tougher. "This is not about pardon." The word love hung in the air like a frail thread. Emily wanted to trust him, but the wounds he had left behind were still raw. "I have more money than I know what to do with, Emily. But it means nothing if I cannot use it to take care of the people I love." "I don't need you to take care of me," she declared with much force. "I have been doing that absolutely perfectly on my own." "Have you?" His voice was kind but pointed when he inquired. "Because that message you sent me says otherwise." Her cheeks reddened with embarrassment and resentment. "That was a slip-up. I meant to forward it to Claire." "And if you had?" he asked. "Would she have been able to offer you what you wanted? What Lily needed?" The reality came to her like a gut-reversing blow. Of course, Claire would have helped, but she was barely scraping by herself. Though Emily had been too proud to ask anyone else, her desperation had misled her. Nick moved forward, his voice softening. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to take the weight off her shoulders, if only for Lily's benefit. But the fear of letting him back in, of giving him the power to hurt her again, was paralyzing. "You don't have to do this alone, Emily. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to help." Before she could answer, Nick's phone buzzed. He retrieved it from his pocket, his face darkening as he saw the screen. "What is it?" Emily inquired. Her interest rose outside of her control. He stopped, then showed her the message. That headline came from a news alert. The enigmatic $5 million donation made by tech entrepreneur Nick Dalton begs questions. Her blood felt frigid. "They already know," Nick said despondingly. This kind of money is not overlooked. The media is going to probe it. Panic tore at her chest. Eyes glowed with iron purpose. Not if I can help it. I'll handle this, Emily, I promise. But as he spoke, Emily couldn't shake the sensation that this was only the beginning of a storm that would upend their lives in ways neither of them could predict. Emily's hands clenched into fists as she gazed at the headline on Nick's phone. Her mind ran wild, picturing reporters swarming her apartment, Lily's name plastered across the tabloids, and her carefully built walls of privacy collapsing under the weight of Nick's riches and notoriety. This is a disaster, she murmured. Why would you transfer so much money at once? Did you think no one would notice? Nick put the phone back into his pocket, his jaw hardening. I didn't think it would matter, he replied. I refused to let Lily or you suffer. Counts. Emily laughed bitterly. Do you even hear yourself? You give the media a weapon to fight us. Probe my life. Lily's as well. Guard her against that? Though his voice stayed strong. Nick's eyes softened. You're not alone in this. Emily, I'll make sure they don't get near either of you. She shook her head, the worry rising like a tidal wave. You don't get it. They will whirl everything. I'll tell you some sad tale about the suffering single mother. And you will be the savior billionaire swooping in to save the day. That it what you are looking for? Nick froze at her words. But before he could reply, her phone buzzed. Expecting another news alert or worse. A message from someone who had already seen the headline. She grabbed it off the table. Claire instead was the one. Emily, are you okay? Did you see the news? Call me. Emily's stomach fell. The story was already circulating. She drew a shaky breath and looked to Nick. I need you to leave. His eyebrows wrinkled. What? You've done enough damage, she said, her voice shaking. I need to figure out how to mend this. Emily, don't do this, Nick begged, edging closer. I'm here to assist. Her eyes burned with unshed tears as she gazed up at him. You don't understand, Nick. Every time you attempt to help, it simply makes things worse. Please, just go. Nick paused, his look troubled. She thought he may protest for a second. Then he nodded curtly. Good, I'm going. But this isn't finished. He turned and left Emily alone in the stifling quiet of her flat. Emily got up the next morning to find her phone vibrating nonstop. She moaned, pushing the sleep from her eyes. Then grabbed for the gadget. Emails, messages, texts, missed calls crowded the screen. Opening her email plummeted her heart. The media frenzy had started. Among the emails, one caught my attention because of its subject line. Exclusive interview, request your side of the story. Emily's stomach turned as she quickly perused the message, which offered a fair compensation for her insights on her past with Nick. Another buzz, a text from an unidentified number, broke through her thoughts. I'm outside. We have to talk. Emily's breath stopped. Glancing through the curtain, she saw a black SUV parked at the curb. Her pulse sped as the driver's door opened, and Nick came out with his phone. She opened the door before he could knock. I told you to leave me alone, she murmured, her voice sharp. Nick looked at her, his face serene but firm. I didn't come to quarrel. You think? She shot, folding her arms. I'm getting interview requests. Nick, we have a problem. You are driving my life into a circus. Is not only the media, he remarked, his tone solemn, brow wrinkled. There's something else. What are you talking about? Shoulder, as though making sure they weren't under observation. Phone showing an email from an unidentified sender. Lot of noise. Mr. Dalton, if you want this to be quiet, you'll pay. Or the whole world learns your dirty little secrets. Emily's stomach turned over. Is this blackmail? Kevin nodded. Oh my God. Her knees went weak and she sank onto the sofa. They're threatening to leak specifics about the move. And about Lily. I've already notified my security team. Nick answered, his voice firm. We're monitoring the sender, she said, her voice getting higher. What if they go public before you locate them? Should they harm Lily? What then? Emily buried her face in her hands, the weight of everything weighing down on her. Nick stated firmly, they won't. Sitting beside her, he continued, this is too much. I can't do this. Nick, I can't fight this battle. You won't have to, he said. I'll handle it. She cast a doubtful glance at him. Why are you doing this? Now? Why? Nick hesitated, his jaw clenching. Because I owe you, he said at last. I owe Lily, and since going away was the biggest mistake of my life. His words lingered in the air, thick with feeling, though a part of her still lingered the hurt he had inflicted. Emily wanted to believe him. Nick's phone buzzed once more before her reply could come. Glancing at the television, his face darkened. They've sent another message. Emily stepped forward to view the email. This time it included a picture of Lily and her friend strolling to the park the week before. The phrase, "Time is running out," fear tore at her breast. "They're watching us." Nick's eyes darkened. Not for long. Emily resisted, but she couldn't ignore the relief of knowing someone was watching Lily and Nick. A world of private detectives, cybersecurity experts, and continual monitoring. Over the next 3 days she found herself swept into Nick's world. Every talk felt like a minefield, loaded with hidden truths and unresolved emotions. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, Nick found Emily seated on the fire escape staring out at the city skyline. The conflict between her and Nick remained clear-cut. He joined her, the calm separating them. "I never wanted this for you," he whispered softly. Emily looked to him, her face tired. "So why did you leave?" Nick groaned and ran a hand through his hair. "Because I was terrified, afraid about not meeting your expectations." Frowning, "Terrified of becoming my father, your father." He was a workaholic, Nick said. He had little left for his family after pouring all into his company. Emily's heart hurt at the sensitivity in his voice. She did not want to treat Lily this way. "But instead, you left us," he continued. His voice weighed with guilt. Neither of them spoke for a time, then Emily added gently, "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you." For a moment, neither of them replied. "It comes down to confidence. And right now, I'm not sure whether I should trust you." Nick nodded, clearly hurt. "Then let me earn it." Emily couldn't get rid of the impression that the storm wasn't over, if anything, rather. It was just starting as they sat there. The gloom of the city was creeping in. Pictures of Emily and Lily in their apartment, on the playground, even outside her office, surfaced with horrifying regularity. The blackmail demands grew more severe over the next several days. Emails arrived faster, each one more dangerous than the last. Emily's nerves were straining. Whomever was behind this knew far too much about her life. Every time Lily ran ahead too far on the pavement, Emily's heart would clench with terror. She hated how her life had spiraled out of control, and how much she was now depending on Nick. She could not concentrate at work and jumped every time her phone chimed. Every time Emily saw him on the phone, her face hard and intense, she felt a pang of something she could not name. Perhaps gratitude mixed with the traces of the love she had once felt for him. He worked late into the night with his security team, poring over leads and trying to track the blackmailer. Emily laid her cup down. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table attempting to divert herself with a cup of tea, Nick stepped in, his face stern. "We have a lead," he said. She scowled. "My team followed the emails to a burner account and believe it relates to someone I used to do business with." Carter Reed. "What type of lead?" Nick hesitated. "He lost everything when I told him I pulled him out of a big contract a few years ago when I discovered he was embezzling money. He harbors resentment against me." Emily's stomach turned over. "Now he's exacting revenge on you using Lily and me." Nick nodded, his jaw stiff. "That's what it seems like. What are you going to do?" She questioned, her voice shaking. "I have already called the cops." He added, "But Carter is cautious. It might take time to attribute this to him." Emily stood, hands shaking. "Nick is monitoring us. We have little time. He is familiar with all aspects of our life." "Emily, listen to me." Nick stretched out and grabbed her hands in his. "I won't let anything happen to Lily or you. I swear." Emily allowed herself believe him for a time. His touch was steadying. She sensed the weight of his own shame and anxiety as she stared into his eyes. And he was struggling to prove something to himself rather than only for Lily and her. 2 days later, Emily had just picked Lily from daycare when her phone buzzed with another email. She glanced at it, her heart sinking as she saw another picture of her and Lily, shot earlier that day. But this email was different. It specified a location, a high-end hotel downtown, with a time, 7 p.m. that evening, and a single line of text: "Come alone. Bring Lily or the world finds out everything." Emily's hands trembled as she showed Nick the email. His face darkened as he read it, his jaw straining with hardly controlled wrath. "You're not going," he declared firmly. "You do have a choice." Nick said, "You stay here with Lily and I'll go. If I miss show, who knows what he'll do. You have no option. He wants me, he wants you." Emily's chest clenched. "And what if he damages you, Nick? What if this is some sort of trap?" Nick's scowl softened as he rested a hand on her shoulder. "I have handled worse than Carter Reed. So trust me." That evening Emily remained in her apartment pacing nervously as Nick got ready to go. His security team had set up close, ready to act should something go wrong. But it did little to calm Emily's anxiety. He wore a dark jacket and his face was unreadable as he tucked a tiny earpiece into his ear. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice almost audible above a whisper. Nick stopped by the door and turned back toward her. "Yes, I do." Then he vanished. Emily couldn't sit still as the hours dragged by, each second stretching out into eternity. She checked her phone nonstop, waiting for information, but the silence was deafening. Lily, fortunately free of the anxiety, played softly in the corner with her toys. At just past 9 p.m., Emily's phone rang, her heart thumping. She grabbed it and said, "It's over." Nick's name appeared on the screen. "Carter's in jail." Emily collapsed onto the sofa, relief flooding her like a tidal wave. Carter's voice was calm but somewhat tired. "It was a bluff," Nick said. "He hoped I would surrender and pay him off before he ran out of choices. He lacked the means to carry through on his threats." She laughed shakily, the stress at last released from her body. "I can't believe it's over," Nick said. "You and Lily are secure, thanks to Nick's lawyers and a well-written statement." Emily battled to understand everything that had transpired and the media frenzy started to wane. Emily turned to see Nick standing there, his hands in his pockets and a wary look on his face one evening as she tucked Lily into bed. Emily knew the real job was just beginning. He asked. She nodded, trailing him into the living room. They sat on the sofa, the weight of unspoken words hovering over them. Emily stared down at her hands, her thoughts whirling. "Nick, I meant what I said about wanting to be part of Lily's life and yours. Nick, I can't dispute that you have been here when it counted most. But I cannot pardon you for the past. I'm not asking for everything at once. Just a chance." She met his stare and for the first time in years she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "I'll take that," he murmured with a small smile. Vulnerability. This was a guy ready to battle for his family. No matter the cost, not the haughtiness, confident Nick she had married. "All right," she replied gently. "A chance." His smile grew and for a minute they just sat there, the weight of the past finally starting to lift. As the days stretched into weeks, Emily and Nick started to piece by piece rebuild. Trust took time and there were still wounds to heal. But for the first time Emily let herself hope, as she watched Nick read a bedtime story to Lily one evening. Her voice soft and full of warmth, Emily realized sometimes second chances weren't about forgetting the past. They were about designing a future worth battling for.